Now, Steve Bookout landed in the honey pot when he came to live with Wayne and Ruth Blacksher in Boydsville. And then I'll follow and I'll tell you a little bit about our 52 years of marriage and my trips back to Rector. And then I have our two most precious, darling children. My son, Calder. He's probably one of the tallest people here. And my beautiful daughter, Sarah Ruth Hurlbert. And they will give you their take on their dad. And then we have other friends that might want to say something. And I do have to tell you that we do have, gotta say it, the 5 most outstanding and above average grandchildren. My son Calder has 3 boys, Connor, 21, Tanner, 17, and Tate, 14. And then my daughter, Sarah Ruth, has 2 beautiful children, Caroline Rose Hurlbert, who is 14. And then my 16-year-old grandson, JP. And we'll tell you about him, the hockey star, okay? But I want you to meet the family. I want to also give you a little bit of heads up, a little business, that we do have a sign-in book like they do, and I've located in the back of that room. And back at that room, you're going to see a display of, as Steve always said, collector's items t-shirts. Steve was an avid cyclist, and I don't know which he got the most pleasure out of, was riding the bike or spending the money to ride the bike on a trail where he could get a t-shirt. And after the ride was over, they put the t-shirts on sale, and they were such a good deal. He bought multiple t-shirts. And I told him I really didn't think we needed to store hundreds of t-shirts in our attic. And he said, Drew, those are collector's items. And I told him, this has been years ago, well, I know what I'm going to do with those t-shirts. I'm going to give them away at your funeral. And so the t-shirts are back there for the taking. So if you find one you like, please take it. And we also have photographs that are out, and some are, we have no idea who they are. So if you recognize yourself, call it out, and you can take that with you. Some of them are obviously family photos, and we would like to get them to the right person. So if you'll do that for us, we really appreciate that, okay? So Simon Bookout, my favorite brother-in-law, come on up here and tell us about your story.
Just got a couple of notes here. I see there are at least 3 or 4 people here who would also need a little cheat sheet based upon their age. So, no offense, I'm just stating reality. But I'll begin by telling you why this tall, good-looking fellow named Steve Bookout went by that name as opposed to Steve Blacksher, because he was raised by the Blacksher family. Steve was born on April the 5th, 1946 in Flint, Michigan. That's where we lived, in a little house. My dad worked at Pontiac Motors, and my mother stayed at home with the 3 of us. Because at that time, Gary, the oldest boy, was 8 years old, I was 4, and Steve was just, I'm not really sure, but just a matter of no more than weeks, perhaps days. But it was a situation where our mother had become progressively ill, to the point that she was unable to care for us, 3 little guys there, And my dad had to work, of course, because money was tight. So she was placed in the hospital, and she remained there the rest of her life. In the meantime, during that period, my dad called his younger brother, J.W. Bookout, Cherie's grandfather, and where is Cherie? Am I looking at Cherie? Okay, I can't see very well. And Judy's father. Judy is here too.
You're not here.
Yes, there she is. Judy's father, J.W. Bookout, and Quanda, and I'll put a little plug in. Two of the finest people you would ever meet, J.W. and Quanda. I'm going to get through this, I'm sure. Anyway, so the two of them came to Flint, Michigan, and they took the three of us to our grandparents' farm here in the Rector area. I'm not exactly sure what they call that area out there, maybe Blooming Grove, but the farm out someone is nodding.
Boydsville.
There was Boydsville, and our grandfather and grandmother had a farm out that way. So when they brought us to Arkansas, of course, Steve was just, he was just a little baby, and someone had to care for him. And so Aunt Ruth and Uncle Wayne, may have to have this guy step in for me. Aunt Ruth and Uncle Wayne came over, and of course I don't remember them coming over, but I was told this. And also two of the finest people ever. And they took Steve as a little baby, took him home, and raised him as their own. And there could not have been finer parents anywhere. He was so fortunate. And not fortunate to have lost his mother, but fortunate to have been raised in the home of Wayne and Ruth Blacksher. In a couple of years, 2 to 3 years, I was taken by another aunt, Irma, and Irma and Elmo, he was the Methodist minister in town, and they had moved by then, but they took me into their home and raised me as their own. And their son, Dana, is here with me today, who is just like my little brother as well. So that's kind of how our family got started. And again, about the name, you may wonder, but Steve retained the name Bookout. I obviously did, because our father dreamed for quite a while that he could get his family back together, his wife and his 3 boys. But that was not to be. And the oldest boy, Gary, remained with the father, and life went on from there. Steve grew up, as you all know, you know him as well as I do probably. He grew up in just the best of circumstances, and he was a strong, healthy, wonderful kid. And the smartest thing about him, he seemed to copy everything I did. So that I always appreciated that. But I went to Hendrix College in Conway, and I graduated in '64. And Steve showed up in the fall of '64 as a freshman at Hendrix. And his 2 buddies are here today who are just like brothers to him, Guy and Jim. And so he was at Hendrix and had a good experience there. While he was at Hendrix, while I was there, I worked in the cafeteria. Very exciting, adventuresome job. And Steve wanted to do something equally exciting. So he was offered a position at the Pink Pussycat Bar and Lounge. And as a bouncer. he was rather tall at that time. Nothing like his son is now, but he was rather tall. And so he worked at that gym, and the guy told me for a couple of weeks or so, and he told me about it, and I said, Steve, I don't think you ought to be doing that. You need to find another job. He's wanting a little extra spending money. I said, you find another job. I said, because if you have that on your resume when you go to find a job, that you worked in the bouncing profession at Pussycat, I said, that would not look good, particularly if you decided to go into church work. Which he did not do. I don't know if that was part of it or not. So anyway, he quit the bouncer job and went on and did other things, but he, at that time, that was in 1968 when he graduated from Hendrix, and you all may recall that Vietnam was really getting hot at that time. I had gotten in the Army Reserve, and I told Steve, I said, you got to do something, get in the reserve or whatever. And I said, I would recommend that you go into the Navy as an officer, go through OCS. I said, you could do that and it would be a great experience. Excuse me. So again, he was wise enough to take my advice, and he went into the Navy, and he did quite well in OCS, except for one thing. The physical part of it, no problem whatsoever. But when it came to the math courses, one in particular, he had a really tough time because neither one of us had much of a math background. And so very late one night, Paula and I were living in Little Rock. I got this call from Steve. As I recall, it was Colette. And he called and told me that he was having an awfully tough time with that course. And he was really worried that he might flunk it. And if he did that, he'd be kicked out of the officer candidate school. And I said, well, Steve, I said, I think you can do it. I said, go talk to the professor, tell him about your background and the fact that, you didn't have a math background, and that you really want to be an officer in the United States Navy. And do some talking like that. And sure enough, he proved to be an excellent salesman. And so he was able to get through the exam and then graduated. And but the part about the exam that I want to comment on is that I don't know if you all are familiar with those exams, but apparently it was very, very demanding. And I told him, I said, Steve, I think you'll make it. I said, but if you don't, you have nothing to be ashamed of. You had the guts to get in there and to try. And I said, for that, I'm so proud of you. And I was, and I continue to be so proud of him. I don't know if you all ever saw him in his dress whites. He looked like $1 million. I tell you, he made all the movie stars look like jerks. And so I was very, very proud of him for that. True to his nature of copying everything I did, after he got out of the Navy, he joined the Travelers Insurance Company because that's where I was employed. So he got a job in Houston, and he got to know quite well this young lady who was living in the Houston area, and by the name of Drew, I believe. And so he did quite well there. He became a district manager in casualty property, just like his brother. And so for that, I was very proud too. All during our growing up, Uncle Wayne, or Unc as he called Uncle Wayne, would have all kinds of stories, of course, and all kinds of expressions. And one of his favorite expressions was to talk about when people would meet each other. and he told about, I don't remember who it was, but some guy meeting someone else and said, I'm so happy to see you, I could just jump hip high. So that was always Unc's expression of jumping hip high. So Steve remembered that, of course. And so one day he called me and he said, I'm flying into Houston. That's where we were living at the time. And he said, why don't you meet me at the airport and we can talk for a few hours. I said, okay. So he comes into Houston, Intercontinental, George Bush Intercontinental, and which is a big, big place, as you know. And back then, you could go to the gate. You didn't have to wait outside. You could actually greet people at the gate when they came in. So I'm standing at the gate, lots of people all over the place, and Steve comes down the ramp with these other businessmen and others who are dressed very nicely, very dignified and so forth. And he gets about half down to the end of the ramp. He sees me and he jumps up and says, hey boy, how you doing? Jumping hip high. So, and it was every bit that loud, if not louder. Well, everybody turned to look at him except one person. I was hiding behind the podium, hoping they would not connect me with him. And sure enough, they didn't. So he had perfected the art of jumping hip high. We had some wonderful times together, some wonderful conversations. We both had the same sense of humor. I'm told that we looked somewhat alike, and he was just a great joy in my life. And I loved him very much. And I always was and always will be so proud of him. And I do believe he was a man of faith and integrity. And he had solid integrity and solid values which were taught to him in this community and by the Blacksters. And I was so proud of him. But anyway, I know, because I'm a man of faith as well, that when I come to the end of my days, and I hopefully am in God's realm, and I expect to be, I'll probably look over, and there's Steve over there hollering, hey boy, jumping hip high. Thank you.
All right. I love you, Uncle Tommy. Okay. Connor, Tanner, and Tate, can you guys stand up and cue? I just want everyone to meet my family. Please, you guys, if you have a chance to visit with them and get to know them. Q is the love of my life, and she had the opportunity to get to know my dad. Q and I lived with my parents, and my dad adored her. So, don't consider it. Okay. So today I'm going to tell you a little bit about my dad, Steve Bookout. Growing up, my dad was everywhere. We had an event that my sister and I participated in, sports, FFA, swim meets. Dad was always there. He took us on road trips to the beach every summer. We went to Glacier National Park one year with the Duns and Lessenberries, camping trips, all kinds of places, and to Boydsville, Arkansas to see Unc and Amy. Now, one thing about my family, traveling to most of these places, we did not get there quickly. My dad liked to eat, And when we traveled, we did not swing through fast food restaurants. We stopped at, if it was breakfast, places like Cracker Barrel, cafeteria food. So basically every time we stopped, it was an hour to an hour and a half. Also, every time we traveled, we stopped to see any relative or friend that was living along this route. People that Sarah, Ruth, and I knew, and people we didn't know who they were at all. But we would stop in and we would visit with these folks. So later on in life, I also learned that a lot of these places we went, they were really close. It just took so long to get there because we stopped to eat and we stopped to visit. But that was important to my dad. Not only did my dad keep in contact with people and friends and relatives, but he recorded and took pictures of everything and everyone that we met. I'm sure many of you in this room are on a videotape somewhere or several videotapes. And the famous question my dad would always ask people is, what's your name and then what's today's date? That was very important to my father. But the other thing about Dad too is he did not ask people's permission to be on video. You were just on video. My dad was not flashy or trendy. He normally had on these t-shirts that he got from his 5K running races or his bicycle races. Typically they were tucked into some khaki brown shorts, and he had this Navajo Indian belt that he would wear, and nothing matched at all. Later on in life, as some of you may know, my dad considered himself a serious cyclist, a racer. And of course that meant that Dad had to be decked out in all the latest bicycle fashion. So fluorescent gear from head to toe, full body spandex suits, blinking lights, and he had like this little rear view mirror that stuck out of his helmet. So he looked like this big old bug flying down the road on a bicycle. My dad was goofy. He was very predictable, but he was also very unpredictable. He was kind and gentle. He was genuinely interested in people and what they had to say. He was always inviting. He was never quick to judge. Dad was likable, even when he was annoying. You still couldn't help but love the guy. My father never forgot about his roots. He was from Boydsville, Arkansas, always telling us stories about his upbringing and about the many, many folks here in Northeast Arkansas that were a part of his life. Everyone my dad had relationships with, all of his friends and family back in Texas that had never been up to this part of Arkansas, knew where Rector was or where Boydsville was. They knew of people's names, they knew stories about these folks, because my dad always talked about this place with them. Sarah, Ruth, and I grew up knowing Boydsville, Arkansas, and Rector. We visited Unc and Annie several times a year, and we both have very fond memories of spending time up here. A lot of these memories were from the Labor Day picnic. One of my favorite stories that I hear about the Labor Day picnic when I was a kid was I had the opportunity to get to know a gentleman in Boydsville named Slim Taylor. And the story about Slim, how it was told to my father, and in fact I have, by my father to me, and I have a picture of it to prove it, was one year at the picnic, they had certain floats that would come by. And so there was a float that was maybe a beauty queen from Rector or another town, and there were some kids on the float throwing out candy. And then there was a group of women that would clap as the float went by. And so this float goes by, the women clap, and then here comes Slim on his float. And it was a float that had a tree, and hanging from that tree branch was a cage with a live raccoon. And then on the tree was one of Slim's prize coon dogs, just boo, going after this raccoon, and there was Slim waving to the crowd, and the little ladies just clapped. I thought that was such a cool story. I have memories as a kid going with Uncle and Annie to the old motel to eat catfish. I have memories attending the First United Methodist Church of Rector, running around Uncle and Annie's with Pam Clayton, who lived down the hill in the house that my father grew up in. Duck hunting with Brian Blacksher. I remember doing that one Christmas. Lots of good memories, but most of all, Sarah Rith and I have a lot of memories of just sitting on a front porch somewhere or in someone's living room, just listening to stories. This place was so important to my dad, and it is important to us. My dad loved family. He was loyal to his family. Growing up in a house with all of our grandparents seemed normal for my sister and I. Later on in life, I realized how lucky and blessed we were to have that experience. We truly were a big, happy family, and this was my dad. As an adult, what I think I admire most about my dad was his true desire to have and maintain relationships with people in his life. That's hard to do. You know, life gets busy, people move, and it's hard to stay in touch with folks. But my dad did it, and he did a good job at it. He kept in touch with folks from his childhood, folks from college, like the Lessenberries and Dunns that are here today. And also, he continued to build relationships and have friends later on in life. Dad really did love people from all walks of life, not a certain group or kind of people, but all people. I also admire how my dad dealt with the battle that he had with cancer. My dad was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer about 8 or 9 years ago. I can remember him getting prepped for a major surgery, and we were in the room, and the doctor came in, and he was not a guy that joked around. And the doctor asked my dad, he said, "Are you ready?" And my dad said, "I'm ready. I hope you sharpened the knives last night." Dad was calm, he was at ease, he was cracking jokes. Many years later, he was then diagnosed with kidney cancer recently, but my dad still never showed fear or bitterness, and I admire that. I know my dad had a great faith in God and had so much support from his family and friends. And, you know, I think about what I would do if I was in that situation, and I would suspect that it would be easy to give up or have a bad attitude being in my dad's situation, but he didn't. And he continued to be present and happy in our lives all the way up to the day he passed away. Finally, my mom and dad are the real love story. It does exist, and I can remember 2 years ago when I moved back in the house with my parents. I got up one morning around 5:30 or 6 to go to work, and I walked in, looked in their room, and I can hear my dad snoring all the way from the kitchen. He's in there snoring. He's sound asleep, my mom's sound asleep, and they have their arms just wrapped around each other. Love, friends, and relationships are important, and I learned that from my dad. Dad never sought recognition. Dad never told people when he did a good deed, when he gave money, when he volunteered. He just didn't talk about it much, but he just did it. You knew my dad from his actions. He did not preach. He didn't boast. He just did, and he loved. And that was my dad to me.
Steve's daughter, and I'd like to introduce my daughter, Caroline, is here with me today. Caroline, you want to stand up really quick and wave. My son, JP, and my husband, Jeff, are actually in Michigan. I think my son is probably, he's either on a beach right now in Michigan, running and doing sit-ups, or he's inside of a gym pushing a sled full of weights up a ramp as he is training for the U.S. National Development Program with hockey, so that's why they're not here today. But thank you so much for coming. Calder really represents and spoke a lot about what I would share as well, so I'll try and shorten mine a little bit. I'm just gonna tell you a few stories about how my dad, yes, he was the kindest, loving, most gentle giant in the world. But before doing so, I do want to acknowledge some of his special talents. And one of those talents is that it's safe to say that my dad could be sometimes the most unaware person in a room. And by that, I mean, let's just say my very first car wreck, where I was behind the wheel, took place here in Boydesville, Arkansas. And I was 8 years old. And I was sitting in my dad's lap in Unc's brand new car. And my dad said, okay, yeah, you do the steering wheel. And somehow in this test run, my first time driving, my dad was unaware that my feet at 8 years old could not reach the pedals of the car. And so when we found ourselves in a ditch on the side of the road in Boydesville, I did realize he was slightly unaware sometimes. He was also unaware that when he did go on these long, rigorous bicycle rides, I mean, all in his spandex with his blinkers on and all of that, when he was gone for a few hours, he was unaware that we had him on Life 360. And so we could look him up and find that he was at the local Waffle House. Or back home in Allen, that he was actually at Max's Donut Shop. And maybe had taken a detour on his bike ride. I have so many stories about him being unaware. Part of them have to do, Tina and John, when we were skiing in Park City, and my dad went missing, which really wasn't that unusual. Usually we would find him eating somewhere, or he'd go off the beaten path. But we'd all been skiing together, and he missed the big glaring signs next to this one ski lift that said, warning, do not get on this chairlift unless you are a professional racer. And so sure enough, he did not see the sign. He was unaware that he didn't look like any of the other people getting on that lift in their racing gear. He got to the top of the lift, and then even was looking around asking the local patrol where the closest green was, the easy way down. So he definitely had an adventure to share with us when we found out that the ski patrol put him on a gurney, even though he was not injured, and they had to ski him down the mountain because he was so unaware. He was unaware that some of you, maybe out there in the audience, may have at different times said to him, oh, hey, Steve, yeah, come see us, come visit, come stay with us. And that could have potentially really been just being polite, and that was just the nice thing to say. But he was unaware, and oftentimes we showed up at several people's homes unannounced, and we would stay with you, and we felt just fine doing that. The stories that we can tell, and especially his college gang, on him being unaware are so many and brought so much laughter to all of us. I would also say he was one of the most aware people, as far as he was aware of other people and other people's circumstances and their feelings, and he really saw them. towards the end of his life, you know, one of the things that he spoke about every day, his number one concern was this Rector High School website, I guess, or I don't know, one of his Facebook. I know he's got multiple websites, you know, between Boydsville and Rector, but he was really concerned about, okay, who would take that over and how would that continue, and all of the pictures and that sense of community. And so thank you to all of the friends out there that did step up and are going to continue to take that forward. A quick, just funny story from our family that I think would summarize my dad and how he was aware was that we were at Susan Berry's wedding in Austin. This was several years back, and our family rented an Airbnb. This was the first time we'd ever rented an Airbnb. We had no idea what to expect, but we didn't do a lot of research. My dad, also being unaware, would not have dug too deeply into where we were staying. So we drive up to this house, and we drive into a neighborhood of homes that, it was a neighborhood that didn't look like our neighborhood at home. There were bars on the windows on some of the homes. The lawns were overgrown. There were broken down cars, you know, out in the lawns. And the people in this neighborhood did not look like us. They didn't dress like us. It was just different. And when our family drove up, we went into the house and we immediately start saying, okay, what's the plan? We might want to switch houses to another side of town. This probably isn't going to work out. What do we do? And as we are talking about how uncomfortable we were and questioning our safety, we look out the window, and sure enough, my dad is across the street shaking hands with this group of people that were sitting out in their lawn, and he's introducing himself. He's explaining to them, like, hey, we're gonna be your neighbors the next 3 days. He wanted to get to know them. He wanted to know about the neighborhood and the community, and that was so eye-opening for us, that he truly embraced this idea of love thy neighbor, and by loving others and taking action on it. So we had the most wonderful life. My dad had the most wonderful life. I know that this place and this community was so very special to him, and because of that, it's so special to us. So thank you all so much for being here.
Well, actually, when Calder started speaking, Sarah Ruth turned to me and she said, I thought you were going next. And I thought, well, I was. I don't know how that happened. But there's just one gap in the story that I want you to know about. And it was that when I met Steve, he came on that motorcycle. There's a picture out there of him on this motorcycle out of the Navy, and he drove it from San Diego on his way to Arkansas and happened to stop in Austin, Texas, where I was going to school, and he was going to catch up with a former or maybe current girlfriend who happened to be a friend of mine. And she asked me that day, she said, Drew, I've got this guy friend who's coming in from the Navy. He's going to stop. You want to go to Schultz's Beer Garden with a group of us and meet him? And I went, yeah, okay. So that's really where we met. And at that time, I've shared with the kids, I really kind of thought he was a smarty pants. But he was handsome, and he had a great sense of humor. And as it turned out, he went from there to Houston, just kind of almost for a gap year. It wasn't really a gap year, but it was his kind of, okay, I've done my stint in the Navy, I'm gonna go to Houston. And I happened to graduate, and I was going to Houston, and I mean, what can I say? She said we would enjoy each other's company. And so we did. Well, at that point in time, I often said that Steve really presented himself with a little false advertising, because his job was to work at the Jones Hall Civic Center downtown Houston that had all the concerts and had the different stars come in. And I mean, all the great events in Houston were there. At the same time, he took courses just for fun at the University of St. Thomas, and they were photography courses and film courses, and I just thought, oh, he's artistic. He loves the theater. He loves all the same things I love. And then, thank you, Simon, he went to work for Travelers Insurance. But we did manage to get a few trips to London out of that gig when we worked for Lloyd's, or had to do business there. But when I met Steve, it was almost as if he said, because he had told me all about his family, he told me all about Boydsville, all about Rector. It was almost if he said directly to me, will you marry me? But know that when my family needs help, we'll take care of them. I heard that loud and clear. But guess what? I was welded to my mother. I was so close to my mother, so I actually beat him to the punch. We married in Houston. We started our family actually from Houston to San Antonio and then to Dallas, where we started our family with Calder. And at the same time, my mother, Rose, or Miramar, moved in with us. So I'm one of those lucky gals that always had help. My mother was always there, and she and Steve were fast friends. Oh my gosh. You know, I used to tell Annie, Ruth Blacksher, that I really ought to be mad at her. And she said, well, why? And I said, because you have just spoiled him rotten. I mean, 3 meals a day, dessert at every meal. And I said, you know what? I really think that you think he's perfect. And this is what she did. She just looked at me and she went. So from that love affair, you know, that I had attached with his family, he loved my mother. And when he worked at Travelers in the Dallas office, the office wasn't too far away. He would take off at lunch and come home. My mother would fix him lunch, and they'd sit and watch Andy Griffith. You know, they spent time together, and it was wonderful. And then we move on to the Dallas area and to Fairview. We start our family, and there's a lot of funny stories about Steve starting his business at home because we had so much responsibility, because we knew that when Unc's health was failing, that we'd move him to Dallas. We'd move him to live with us. And if you knew Unc and knew Wayne Blacksher, he was practical, if nothing else.
Well, maybe we can't stay here on this farm. We'll just do it.
And they actually moved in with us. We built an apartment, and they moved in, and they had a wonderful life there. We did have to caution to not talk too much politics with the neighbors, because if you know Texas, you know, that was a kind of a sore spot that you didn't want to mix politics with friendships right off the bat. But we had a wonderful life with them, wonderful. And the kids, we all saw firsthand love in action. Steve loving my mother and Steve loving his family. And we had a grand time together. The kids used to bring their friends over and they would dance. This is before TikTok, and they would dance and do all things in front of Unc and Annie. And Unc would take his teeth out and show them what it was like. You know? Annie appeared in quite a few of Sarah Ruth's projects at school. One was she had to choose a career and she needed to know something about it. So she went with Amy when she went to the podiatrist to get her bunions worked on. I mean, so it was videoed. We probably have that somewhere. So many funny, wonderful stories. And then Unc was diagnosed with ALS. That happened to be what happened to him. And he lived over about a 7-year period of time, and his health just continued to decline. but he passed away in our home, and our children were there. Steve and I were there. And then my mother, Amy, stayed with us for several years. Her life continued, and she was so fun and funny and cute, and all the kids wanted to come over and see her. And Steve was, the real deal, taking care of everybody. And then when she passed away, my mother moved into that apartment. And so we've seen this circle of life. My mother came up here director. Y'all may have met her. Her name was Rose. And like Calder and Siri the Lid, all of our friends know the rector story. They know all about Boydsville. They know about you. I've held it together, but I'm really gonna miss him. And I love all of you for loving him. And I truly do believe the most wonderful thing happened. He was not in pain up until the last day of his life. And then he was sedated. And he passed away so gently. And the next morning, I got up and Steve planted 1,000,000 trees around our property because he wanted it to be like Boydsville. And all those trees shed leaves every year, and they're too close to the house and all that. But I walked outside, and it's been hot in Dallas. Hot. And the mornings are still and damp. And I walked out into my backyard, and I have a fish pond that he built for me too. That I told him one day he's going to be at my funeral, and one of the kids are going to say, Mom would have loved a fish pond, and he built me one. And I stood by my fish pond, and the most wonderful breeze came, and it was high in the leaves, really high. And then it came down, and it was soft. Y'all know what a soft breeze feels like. And I promise you, I could hear Steve saying, you're gonna love this. You're gonna love it. And I know I will. And I love you for coming. Please sign the book at the end of that room so we know you're there and we can talk about you. And please take a t-shirt. I don't want to drag them back home. And look at those pictures and reminisce. And thank you for being who you are. Amen. Now somebody else is just dying to say something. I know I'll overcatch y'all. Have at it. Okay? Okay, here comes somebody. My name's Carol Clifton. And I didn't leave. Get up here. Steve was a good friend. I started to school with him. I went to church with him. Shopped in the field. Picked cotton with him. We went to church together. Boydsville is a wonderful community. We all were close. You cannot, just like he described it. We just have a connection, even to this day. All the kids have a connection. And he was just so fun. And he got the first camera any kid around there. We loved it. We thought it was awesome. He was walking around with a camera, 8 or 9 years old. I don't really know. But just a lot of fond memories. I had 4 brothers. And then Steve, there wasn't very many girls around. There were several, but they lived out. But we've always had a connection. I went to California after graduating. He was stationed out there. My mom and dad came out there, and he made a point to come to LA to see them. He was in San Diego, but he never forgot his roots. And you talk about Ruth and Wayne Blackster, they were awesome. She was my 2nd grade teacher, and his. But she had us all, the whole class, write
church to his mother when she was sick. And she was just a caring person. And Wayne and Ruth hit a gold mine when they got Steve, and he did too. And but he was wonderful growing up, and anybody that ever knows him, and he's I've thanked him several times for keeping the community alive, because there's nothing out there anymore. And and there was a lot of kids out there, and we all knew one another, and so he's kept it all these years with the memories. And even when we went to high school, he still continued to do it. And I love him, and I love your family.
Well, I am one of those infamous college friends of Steve's. And I'm going to be very brief because I can't add a whole lot to what's been said, but I can fill in some blanks as far as college and after that. And we called ourselves the Gang. The Gang actually started in 1964. And Guy Lessenberry, Guy, raise your hand. Guy got to Hendricks and met Steve, and they became fast friends. I'm actually much younger. I didn't arrive until 2 years later when my wife and I, we weren't married at the time, but we appeared as college freshmen. And one of the things that I learned very early about Steve is that he had a food fixation. He was never far from food, and he would get nervous when he was not close to food. And he ate all the time. I'm surprised he didn't weigh 500 pounds. But when we go out to eat after I arrived, I was actually Steve's college roommate. We would go to the college cafeteria and we'd go through the line and we'd eat, and then we would go to the ice cream bar and we would each get ice cream, and Steve all loved ice cream. He would bring ice cream back and he would turn and talk to someone. One of our group would steal his ice cream and hide it, and he would go crazy. I have never seen anyone get so upset about a dish of ice cream, but he did. And he never learned, he never watched his ice cream, and we stole it every time. So, at any rate, following his graduation from college and that, guys, Steve went into the service. Susie and I remained at Hendricks until we graduated in 1970. Susie and I married in 1970. Guy and Judy married in 1971. And Steve and Drew married in 1972. We attended each other's weddings. We were in each other's weddings. And we raised our 7 children as cousins. And 2 of those, besides the Bookout children, are here. And that Guy and Judy's 2 children, Brian and Beth. I don't see Brian. What happened to back Brian and Beth? And I want to tell you how much your parents and the Bookouts and the Dunns appreciate y'all being here. But for the 50 years after that, we went on vacations together. We celebrated holidays, Labor Day sometimes, although Steve was normally up here. Memorial Day and other occasions, and we were as close as 3 families could be, and it has been a treasure, and it's something that I think God gave us as a gift, a friendship that has endured so much over now 60 years, and I'm telling you it's important. But I want to tell you something else that was important to Steve that's already been alluded to, and that is his love of Boydsville, and I'll have to have a story to tell you. But Guy and I and others came to Boydsville with Steve because Steve loved this community, and he talked about the community. As a matter of fact, he took the Clay County Democrat, which he took great pleasure in reading to us. These community columns that are written. Well, there was one written by Mrs. Harden, and he wanted us to meet Mrs. Harden. And so he took several of us out to meet her, and we sat and visited with her and listened to her tell stories and listened to Steve tell her stories. That's how much he loved this community, and y'all have played a major role in his life, and therefore you have played a major role in the life of Drew and of these two children and of these grandchildren. And my advice to you is that you can ever develop friends that will last for 60 years. Do that, even if it's someone like Steve Bookout. Okay.